intro music. Yeah! Woohoo!
Howdy, and welcome in, Star Trek League of Men fans. Today, I want to take a look at these hostiles right here. These are augment hostiles, Hijacked D3s, Legionaries, and Mayflowers that have come out with the Wrath of Khan arc. How do you take them on? How do you avoid the bigs? And what should you go after? These are all things I want to cover today, as well as basics in crewing, and hopefully you leave here with a better understanding of how it works. Now, I do want to point out, if you're watching this video as it comes out, I agree with you that a lot of the events that have come out are pushing a higher standard than I think is achievable for most people. What I'm basically saying is a lot of those events are too difficult. That said, this video is going to cover the hostiles themselves, which I think are pretty attainable, but there is a level of difficulty, as we've seen, especially as you go higher tiers. But we're going to talk about the basics, and again, hopefully you cover that with me, and you're good to go. At least that's the hope. So let's start with the basics, which is payouts. You have 4 different types here. In fact, many people are calling this 4 different loops. You have a G3, G4, G5, and G6 set, as these go from low levels down at level 26 all the way up to level 70. And even the G6 players out there, the level 70s out there, running into some difficulties with those big ones. So don't worry, if you're having struggles, you're not alone. So let's take a look at what we're seeing here. And the biggest thing is how these hostiles actually work. So I'm going to pull one up here. You see, this is me taking on a level 60 with my level 60 ship. And the 2 abilities you want to pay attention to are the ship ability here for the increase of ISO damage with 15% at the start of combat. And then you have an Apex barrier one right here, not so wounded. Now, you have that same thing with all types, and is that continual change in hostile strats. Remember, when we talk about how hostiles work, we don't have that same worry and concern when it comes to newer hostiles, or older hostiles, whereas the newer ones have these newer abilities that we have to then combat. So this is going to come into crewing with things like this right here. Now, I'm trying to show a varied crew set and something that maybe you have, but there are several ways that you can attack these, and it all comes down to the style that you're trying to go after. And sometimes that means changing the level you're targeting. So remember how I said there's G3, G4, G5, and G6. So let's start with the crewing ideology that I like to go with first. Yes, I am blowing this ship up for a reason, which is actually going with a loot set. Why are we doing that? One mistake I notice a lot of players do with this new hostile is they're trying to go for their ops level. They assume better hostile equals better loot. That's not actually the case with a lot of these hostiles. In fact, let's take a look at this chart right here. And what we're going to see is common loot is actually highest concentrated in the level 40 hostile, not in actually going higher. So if you're a level 44 player and you're saying, hey, I really want to hit the level 44s, like, you get the logic. But how this is actually set up, as you can see in the chart, is the 44 is moving you into G4, which means now you're in the uncommon realm. Now, I'm not saying you don't want to earn the uncommon currency, which, as we'll look in a second, when it comes to the faction tree, you are going to want to get uncommon, rares, and epics, etc. down the road. And there are ways to do that we'll cover here in a moment. But more importantly, what you want to get is the loot. So first thing I want everybody here to do is learn to punch down, for most of you, and focus on loot, especially early on as you're working your way through. And an early thing that you can do to do that is this crew right here. Now, there's other variations to this crew. For example, many of you may not have Rachel Garrett, even though a lot of you have unlocked Enterprise E Picard and Enterprise E Data. In fact, my low-level account unlocked that at about level 27. Based on the current payouts of officers and such. Now, if you don't have those, other things can apply, but what we're thinking here is loot, loot, loot. That's why you've got the Doc Brown right there below decks. That's why you can run the EMH Doc from Voyager below decks. It's also why I have Rachel Garrett here, though again, keep in mind, you can swap that out for 5 of 11, an officer that most people have more common than Rachel Garrett because she is newer at the time of this video. But again, you have 5 of 11 right there who will also give you that loot ability with her officer ability. A lot of people love that ability, maxing out 100% if you take her to tier 5. So you want to focus on loot because, again, what are we seeing? We're seeing the level 40s have the most common loot, and that is the secret to the sauce so that you can go and then complete that #1 faction pull, which is what most of you are trying to do, especially early on. Work through the system and get that common hijack exchange. And that also makes it pretty easy to get your double pull, knowing that you need to punch down to the 40s instead of trying to hit a 44 or a 52 or 68, because the amount of commons that pays out, again, just as you can see, lowers down. Also point out that there are loot goblins in this run. which can also be taken advantage of with a loot crew. So as you can see, we have a G3, G4, G5, and G6 loot goblin, and those pay out commons, uncommons, rares, and epic. It's nice you get all 4 types from that set, and that will increase as you go down the line. You can see even the G3 one giving 20,000 common, which is more than a level 40 gives. And remember, these spawn in any of these systems. That timer being around 30-ish minutes, look around, you're probably going to find one up. And as more time passes, you're going to find it easier to find these hostiles. Let's go ahead and send our ship back in as we talk. Now, crewing, again, can vary. If you want to then start working your way up, the idea is you want to loot crew the level 40, level 50, level 60, level 70 eventually. Level 70 really being a dream for many of us, but you want to hit those loot crews at these sweet spots. 50 being the one that you would do for the uncommons, for example. But let's say that you want to move up. Well, if you're trying to hit around your level, you do not want to use a loot crew. You want to use a more realistic crew like something like this, which you see have Voyager, Doc, E Data, which is something that you see a lot of, but there are other ways to do this as well. For example, if you have Anorax, his captain ability sadly will not boost the chest here, but it will, in fact, increase the apex barrier, which can help you survive more, especially if you have the below deck spots to have criticals, hull breach, ISO damage with things like Nurse Chapel, Hugh, Belana Torres, those type of below deck officers that can really provide that extra oomph that you need to have success, even if you don't have as many below deck slots as I do. See, my first one being a loot officer. But you see I have hull breach, I have morale, you see I have criticals, you see I have Nurse Chapel, and even Apex Shred if you have that. Because these, as you saw, remember these hostiles are bringing in the apex barrier. We're trying to focus on these standard hostiles. Crewing can be built around that. Strange New World officers are also good, but I want to show you this right here. Now, many of you cheekily probably caught why I made the video last week about freezing a chaser. Now, you're going to want to pay attention to this if you missed that video. This is going to give you a big piece of it right here. I talked about 3 different ways, but we're going to go towards it. We're going to hit recall, spam the stop button, and then we're going to not touch anything. Leave it alone. Wait for that chaser to freeze because these things will instantly kill you. Remember, we got to let that red ring disappear. It's going to stop moving. Then we're free to move and be okay. You see somebody else did the same thing right next to me. Why did we do that? Because this chaser has a 90% chance of destroying you without you getting a shot off. Now, I do want to point out that that loot goblin I talked about that spawns in these systems also has a chance to do the same thing, but it's only 30%. 90% chance, what does that end up equating to? Well, a lot of you have talked about Rev, you've moved up to 60, you're so strong now, and well, that's very relative. Sure, let's just say that's true. But here's the thing, these D7s hurt. How much do they hurt? Well, I'm actually going to show you a log, and it might hurt you to see this, but scroll on down like, wow, look, he's been farming 50s, he's doing all these things, but look at this, 48, level 48 to a level 60. Wipes me out like nothing. And it gets worse than that if you want me to keep scrolling. We tested it out against several of these, and these D7s, even down to a 38, instantly takes out no matter what I'm throwing at it. You want to be careful. So freezing these hostiles, check out that video if you haven't for the 3 ways to deal with these chasers, but you want to be able to come in here and move and operate freely. Just make sure you watch out for what we're calling landmines, because now they're going to sit still, but they look like a regular interceptor. Make sure you don't touch those. If it's not moving, leave it alone. Consider it a little sneaky rattlesnake that you don't want to go mess with. Just no rattle to here. So crewing wise, again, I kind of want to cover that. We talked about loot crews for 40s, 50s, 60s. But in terms of regular PvE crews, what it really comes down to is your below decks. That is so critical in today's game. I want you to have below deck officers like I was just showing you. I want you to have Hugh below decks. I want you to have Nurse Chapel below decks. I want you to have hull breach and morale. These are very important in today's game. If you've picked up Apex Shred, which is section 31 Giorgio, or you can have Quasi on the bridge, those can be very helpful. Actually, reverse that, if you will. Quasi on the bridge in section 31 Giorgio below. But you can also use Strange New Worlds. We've seen those crews be very effective. So if we go into my presets, which I can show you here, you can see some of those. I want to give you various examples, but please keep in mind that there are many options here. Your standard runs are fine. So for example, this is one of my section 31 runs, or my Strange New World runs with section 31 Giorgio. You can see other regular hostile crews I have here are still effective. Traditional crews like Janeway that you see me running here are effective, and you can even go crazy with Anorak's crews, though not as many people have that, but I'll try to provide some of those here on the screen so that you can reference them. Traditional crews will work as you're taking on a normal hostile. Anything that you have that can help combat against Apex barriers big. Really comes down to you though, punching really hard, really fast, and criticals, max damage are going to do that. If you can get some damage reduction with things like the Janeway's Captain's ability, that absolutely helps, which you're doing that by the shields. However, whatever way you find to do it will work. The main key is simply understanding how the hostiles play out and roll out, avoiding that nasty D7, and then getting the currency that you need, then do your refines in the refinery of the faction store. Now again, I don't want to say that I think that these hostiles are easy. They're definitely not. And I do agree that all the events coming out the month that this rolled out are difficult. But crewing is not really hard here. Many of you have unlocked the officers like Enterprise Data, Janeway, etc. that you're going to need to have success here. The real key is knowing which hostile to hit, and hopefully these graphs and this information has helped you find that. If it has, comment down below and smash that like button. Live long and plunder. Stay safe with our Space Cowboys. Deuces, that's me. Catch you on the next Star Trek Fleet Command video. Greatly appreciate all of you, and I'm out.
An even better outro than the intro. For the Empire and glory to your house.